My name is Rebecca Collins, and I never thought the hardest betrayal of my life would come from my own mother. One day, she walked into my workplace and told my boss that I had stolen money from the company. She said it was to teach me a lesson. In that single moment, my entire career, reputation, and future were put on the line, and I had no idea the only thing that could save me was the very camera footage she had forgotten about. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. That morning began like any other, though I remember it now as the calm before the storm. I worked as an assistant manager at a local bookstore cafe in Denver, Colorado. It wasn't glamorous, but I loved the place. The shelves stacked with paperbacks, the scent of fresh coffee drifting between aisles, and the quiet hum of customers reading in the corners. For someone like me who had fought tooth and nail to prove I could be responsible and dependable, the job was more than just a paycheck. It was a sanctuary. I had built trust with the staff, managed late-night closings without complaint, and had even begun training to take on more responsibilities from my boss, Mr. Harrison. He was a man who believed in giving people chances, and for months, I felt like I was finally earning mine. But then came that day. I had just finished restocking the counter with bags of espresso beans when I noticed Mr. Harrison walk in, looking more serious than usual. His brow was furrowed, his lips pressed tightly, and behind him, my heart nearly stopped, was my mother, Janet Collins. She had her arms crossed, her chin lifted, and a cold smile that made me uneasy right away. I hadn't spoken to her much in the past few weeks. Our relationship had always been rocky. She had a habit of undermining me, making me feel like I could never do anything right, and whenever I achieved something, she'd find a way to diminish it. I had learned to keep my distance, but seeing her here, in my workplace, set off alarms I couldn't ignore. "Rebecca," Mr. Harrison said gravely, "could we step into my office for a moment?" I wiped my hands on my apron, trying to stay calm, but as I followed them into the small office in the back, my stomach twisted. Something was wrong. The second the door closed, my mother wasted no time. "I'm here because your daughter has been stealing money from this store," she announced, her voice sharp and full of certainty. "I raised her. I know her habits. She thinks she can hide things, but she can't hide them from me. I thought it was better you knew now before it gets worse." My breath caught in my throat. "What?" I could hardly process what I was hearing. "That's not true. Why would she—" She cut me off with a wave of her hand. "Don't play innocent, Rebecca. I saw the signs. I know you've been struggling with your bills, and I know exactly how you deal with pressure, lying and taking shortcuts. Don't try to deny it." Mr. Harrison turned his gaze toward me, stern and unreadable. "Is there any truth to this?" I felt heat rising in my face, my pulse hammering in my ears. "Absolutely not. I would never take money from the store. You know that. Why would she even say that?" I looked between him and my mother, searching for reason in her eyes, but all I saw was a twisted satisfaction. "She needs to learn," my mother said coldly. "Sometimes the only way a child understands responsibility is when the world teaches her a lesson. She's been reckless her whole life, always trying to pretend she's grown, but she's not. Maybe if she faces real consequences now, she'll finally wake up." Her words hit me harder than a slap. This wasn't just a misunderstanding, this was intentional. My own mother had come here not to protect me, not to help me, but to destroy me in the name of some warped sense of discipline. Mr. Harrison leaned back in his chair, rubbing his temple. "Janet, these are serious accusations. If what you're saying is true, then I'll have no choice but to take disciplinary action. But if it's not—" He trailed off, glancing at me again. His trust wavered in that moment, and it felt like the ground beneath me was slipping away. I wanted to scream, to demand why she was doing this, but my voice shook too much. "Mr. Harrison, I promise you, I didn't steal anything. I can explain my finances. I can show you proof. I don't know why she's saying this." My mother smirked. Oh, Rebecca, always the actress, always with the excuses. Her words burned, but somewhere deep inside, a flicker of defiance stirred. I wasn't going to let this happen. Not here. Not after everything I'd worked for. I clenched my fists beneath the desk, forcing myself to stay calm, though my whole body was trembling.
What I didn't know then, but would soon discover, was that the store's security cameras had been rolling the entire week. Every transaction, every closing count, every moment of my supposed theft was captured. And it was those very recordings, cold and impartial, that would expose the truth behind my mother's lie. But for now, all I could feel was the crushing weight of betrayal. Sitting across from the woman who should have been my greatest ally, watching her try to burn down everything I had built, all in the name of a lesson. The accusations still rang in my ears long after my mother left Mr. Harrison's office that day. She hadn't stayed to defend her claim or offer any evidence. She simply dropped the verbal bomb, crossed her arms with that self-satisfied expression, and walked out as though she'd accomplished her mission. Mr. Harrison, torn between his loyalty to me as an employee and the seriousness of the charge, told me we would review the matter and talk again soon. That phrase, so vague, so heavy, felt like a storm cloud hanging over my head. As I went back to the counter to help a customer, my hands trembled while sliding their book into a bag. I smiled and made small talk, but inside, my thoughts churned with confusion and dread. Why had she done this? Why now? The truth is, this wasn't the first time my mother had sabotaged me. Growing up in a small town in Kansas, I had quickly learned that Janet Collins cared more about appearances than about my happiness. She prided herself on being the kind of woman who spoke the truth, but in reality, her truth was often a weapon. If I came home with an A on a test, she'd point out the one question I got wrong. When I made the cheerleading squad, she told people I only got in because they needed an extra body. Every success was chipped away at, minimized until I felt like it wasn't worth celebrating at all. It wasn't that she didn't notice my achievements, she just couldn't stand for me to feel proud of them. Somewhere in her twisted reasoning, keeping me small was her version of parenting. By the time I turned 25, I had built walls around myself to keep her at a distance. I moved to Denver, away from the tiny town where her opinions carried weight, and I found the bookstore café that became both my workplace and my second home. The people there saw me for who I was, hardworking, reliable, kind. Customers would ask for me by name. My coworkers joked that I had a magic touch with angry customers, always knowing how to calm someone down with a smile or a thoughtful word. For the first time in my life, I was valued not for what I lacked, but for what I brought to the table. But my mother had a way of inserting herself into my life even when I thought I'd closed the door. She'd call at odd hours, sometimes late at night, and berate me for not visiting enough. She'd remind me that I owed her for raising me. When I ignored her calls, she left long voicemails filled with passive-aggressive comments about how I must be too busy playing manager to care about family. I often sat in silence after listening, torn between anger and guilt, wondering why I still longed for her approval when it had only ever been dangled like bait on a hook. That toxic cycle was the hidden problem, the truth I kept to myself while smiling at customers and counting the register at night. No one at the cafe knew how much power my mother's words still held over me. No one knew that sometimes after a shift, I'd sit in my car gripping the steering wheel, fighting back tears because of something she'd said on the phone. To the world, I was a capable young woman with her life on track. But inside, I was still that little girl scrambling to prove to her mother that she was enough. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now, back to the story. And now, with one accusation, Janet had struck at the very foundation I had built for myself. She hadn't just questioned my integrity, she had weaponized the one thing I cherished most, the trust I had earned at my job. She had taken the place I considered safe and turned it into a battlefield. That evening, after closing the store, I sat in the office with the fluorescent lights buzzing overhead and tried to make sense of it all. I pulled out my journal, a habit I'd developed years ago to keep myself grounded, and began to write. "She wants to ruin me," I scribbled across the page, my pen pressing so hard it nearly tore the paper. Why does she need me to fail? Why is teaching me a lesson more important than loving me? I thought about all the lessons she had tried to teach me before. When I was 16, she called the school to report that I had skipped classes, even though I hadn't, just to watch me get in trouble. When I was 19, she told a family friend that I had stolen jewelry from her, which wasn't true. It had been misplaced in her own drawer, later found weeks later, without apology. Each time, she brushed it off as her way of making me face responsibility. But responsibility for what? For simply existing as her daughter? I sat there for nearly an hour before finally locking up and walking out into the cold Denver night. My breath fogged in the air as I hugged my coat around me, and I couldn't shake the gnawing fear in my chest. This time felt different. This time, her words hadn't just bruised me. They had the potential to destroy my livelihood. What I didn't know as I trudged home to my tiny apartment was that my mother's accusation had already set gears in motion. Mr. Harrison, torn between fairness and caution, had begun pulling transaction logs from the past few weeks. He wanted to verify every penny accounted for. And while I feared what her words would cost me, what I couldn't yet see was that the truth had a way of leaving traces. Traces she couldn't erase, no matter how convincing her story sounded. For now, though, the hidden problem remained. My mother's toxic need for control, her willingness to tear me down in front of others, and my own unhealed wound of wanting her approval, even as she tried to strip me of everything. It was a battle that had been waged quietly for years, and now it was about to spill out into the open for the world to see. The days that followed my mother's accusation felt like walking across thin ice. Every step uncertain, every sound amplified by fear. At first, nothing seemed different on the surface. Customers still ordered their lattes with extra foam, teenagers lingered over comic books, and regulars waved as they left with their bags of novels. But beneath the surface, the atmosphere had shifted. My coworkers, though kind, began to glance at me a little longer when I counted the register. Mr. Harrison's smile seemed tighter, his tone more clipped. I could feel suspicion in the air, as though invisible threads had tied me to my mother's words, making me guilty by association. The third day, the breaking point arrived. It was a Tuesday evening, and I had just finished the nightly closeout. Every bill and coin counted, every receipt balanced. Numbers calmed me. Cold, unfeeling, and honest. When the drawer matched the transaction report to the cent, I felt a small victory, a whisper of proof that I wasn't what she accused me of being. But as I placed the deposit into the safe, Mr. Harrison walked in holding a clipboard. His face was unreadable. "Rebecca," he said quietly, "we need to talk." I froze. The way he said it, measured, cautious, made my chest tighten. I nodded and followed him into the office, the familiar room that now felt like a courtroom where I was the defendant. He shut the door gently but firmly, then turned to face me. I clenched my fists at my sides. "That's not true. I mean, yes, I have bills like everyone else, but I manage. I don't take money that doesn't belong to me. Whoever told you that?" I stopped myself, realizing I didn't have to guess who it was. My voice cracked. "It was my mother, wasn't it?" Mr. Harrison's silence was confirmation enough. He didn't nod, didn't deny it, just stared at the clipboard as though the numbers could shield him from the mess of emotions playing out before him. "She's wrong," I whispered, my throat tightening. "She's always done this. She twists things, makes me look like I'm irresponsible or untrustworthy, but she's never been right about me. Please, Mr. Harrison, you have to believe me." He finally looked up, and though his expression softened, it didn't bring comfort. "Rebecca, this isn't about what I believe, it's about what I can prove. And right now, I don't have enough proof either way." That was the breaking point. My mother's lie had grown roots, spreading through the soil of my life until it poisoned everything. I realized then that no matter how carefully I balanced the registers, no matter how many times I explained myself, her words would always cast a shadow over me. The weight of it pressed down on my chest until I could hardly breathe. When I left the office that night, my vision blurred with unshed tears. The bookstore café, once my sanctuary, felt hostile, foreign. The laughter of a few lingering customers echoed like mockery in my ears. I walked out into the cold night air, gulping in deep breaths, trying to steady myself, but the truth was unavoidable. If I didn't find a way to expose her lie, I could lose everything. At home, the silence of my apartment felt suffocating. I tossed my bag onto the couch and sank into the cushions, replaying the conversation in my mind. She had gone too far this time. This wasn't a high school rumor or a family gathering embarrassment. This was my career, my reputation, my livelihood. She had painted me as a thief in front of the one man whose trust I needed most. I picked up my phone and scrolled through my contacts, hovering over her number. Part of me wanted to call and demand answers, to scream at her for what she had done. But another part of me knew it would be useless. Janet Collins never admitted fault. She would twist my words, manipulate the conversation, and somehow make me feel like I deserved what she had done. That was her gift, her curse, the ability to convince people that her cruelty was righteousness. Instead, I put the phone down and stared at the ceiling. My chest ached with a mix of anger and grief. She was my mother. Mothers were supposed to protect, to guide, to stand by their children when the world turned against them, but mine had become the very force I had to protect myself from. And worse, she believed it was for my own good. I didn't sleep much that night. My mind kept spinning, searching for a way out of the trap she had set. I couldn't keep living under suspicion, waiting for the next shoe to drop. Something had to change. And for the first time, I realized I couldn't fix this by myself. If I was going to survive her lies, I needed proof. Solid, undeniable proof that I was innocent. Little did I know, that proof was already waiting for me. It was hidden in plain sight, quietly recording every moment of my shifts, every transaction, every closing count. And soon, those cameras would become the key to exposing not just her lie, but the truth about the woman who claimed she was only trying to teach me a lesson. By the end of that exhausting week, I had begun to accept that I couldn't fight this battle alone. My mother's words were poison, and once spoken, they clung like smoke that refused to clear. Every shift felt like a silent trial where I was under constant observation. I tried to carry myself as if nothing had changed, smiling at customers, offering recommendations, wiping down counters with my usual care, but I could feel the weight of suspicion pressing on me with every passing day. It was Friday afternoon when the first thread of hope appeared. I was behind the counter, rearranging some new arrivals on the display, when Claire, one of my coworkers, leaned over and whispered, "Hey, are you okay? You've seemed, I don't know, off lately." I looked up startled. Claire was a few years younger than me, a college student who worked part-time, but she had always been warm and friendly. Her brown eyes studied me with genuine concern. I hesitated, debating whether to confide in her. Most of the staff didn't know what had happened behind closed doors in Mr. Harrison's office, but something about her sincerity loosened my tongue. "It's my mom," I admitted quietly. "She told Mr. Harrison that I was stealing from the register." Her mouth fell open. "What? That doesn't make sense. You're the most careful one here. I've seen you count the drawer 3 times before leaving."
Hearing her say that felt like a lifeline. Someone else had noticed.
I wasn't just defending myself blindly, there were witnesses to my integrity, even in small ways. I managed a shaky smile. Thanks. I don't know why she said it. Maybe to embarrass me, maybe just because she likes control. But now Mr. Harrison's looking into it, and I can tell he doesn't know what to believe. Claire frowned. Then her expression sharpened, like a light bulb had gone off in her head. Doesn't he know we've got cameras? The ones above the registers? Her words stopped me cold. Cameras. Of course. I had known they were there. I passed them every day. Small black domes mounted in the corners of the store, but I had never really thought about them. They were for shoplifters or to prevent customers from slipping a book into their bag, not for something like this. But then I realized they didn't discriminate. They captured everything. Every time I opened the register, every deposit, every moment my mother had accused me of stealing, the camera had been rolling. My heart began to race. Do you think he's checked them? I asked. I don't know, Claire said. But if he hasn't, he should. That would clear things up fast. That night after closing, I mustered the courage to bring it up. Mr. Harrison was at his desk, reviewing paperwork, his reading glasses perched on his nose. I stood in the doorway, my palms damp. Mr. Harrison? I said softly. He glanced up. Yes, Rebecca? I was wondering. My throat tightened, but I forced the words out. Have you looked at the security footage from the registers? For a moment, he just blinked at me, as though the thought hadn't occurred to him. Then his brows furrowed, and he leaned back in his chair. I haven't, he admitted. I was focusing on the transaction logs and reports. Why? I swallowed hard. Because if there's been any suspicion about me, the cameras should prove what's true. You'll see I haven't taken anything. The silence stretched between us. Finally, he removed his glasses and rubbed his temple. You're right. I should have thought of that. It's just, he sighed, looking suddenly older and more tired. These situations are messy, Rebecca. When a parent comes forward with concerns, it complicates things. I wanted to be fair. I clenched my fists at my sides, keeping my voice steady. I understand, but being fair means looking at all the evidence. Please, I need this to be cleared up. Mr. Harrison studied me for a long moment, then nodded slowly. All right, I'll pull the footage tomorrow morning. We'll see what it shows. Relief surged through me, though it was tempered by fear. I knew I had nothing to hide, but what if the angles weren't clear? What if some innocent gesture was misinterpreted? What if even proof wasn't enough to counter my mother's poisonous influence? Still, I left the office with a flicker of hope that I hadn't felt in days. The next morning, the entire staff gathered early for the weekend rush, but I could barely focus on shelving books or prepping the café. My thoughts kept drifting to the office where Mr. Harrison was reviewing hours of footage. At one point, I walked past the closed door and saw the faint glow of the monitor spilling into the hallway. My stomach churned. By lunchtime, he emerged, his expression unreadable. He carried a flash drive in his hand, and for a moment, I thought I might collapse from the tension. Rebecca, he said quietly, could you come in for a moment? Inside, he shut the door and gestured toward the chair opposite his desk. My legs felt like lead as I sat down. He plugged the flash drive into his computer and clicked play. On the screen, grainy footage flickered to life. There I was, behind the register, smiling as I handed change to a customer. The angle captured my every movement, counting bills, placing money in the drawer, carefully closing it again. Clip after clip, shift after shift, it was the same. No sneaky movements, no suspicious behavior, just me, doing my job. Mr. Harrison let the footage play for a few minutes before pausing. He turned to me, his expression softer now. Rebecca, so far, everything I've seen lines up with what you've told me. Nothing looks out of place. My chest loosened, and for the first time in days, I could breathe. But, he added, with his tone firm again, I want to finish reviewing everything before I make a final decision. I need to be thorough. I owe you that. I nodded quickly. Of course. Thank you for looking. As I left his office, a strange mix of emotions washed over me.
Relief, yes, but also anger. Anger that it took this much, that my honesty wasn't enough, that my own mother's word had nearly been more powerful than my years of loyalty. Still, for the first time since this nightmare began, I felt the scales tipping ever so slightly in my favor.
Outside eyes were finally seeing the truth. And though I didn't know it yet, the footage would become far more than just a record of my innocence. It would reveal things even I hadn't noticed, things my mother hadn't anticipated. The very evidence she had counted on not existing would soon unravel her entire narrative. The weekend rush came and went in a blur, but my thoughts stayed fixed on the footage Mr. Harrison was reviewing in his office. Every time I passed by that closed door, I imagined him clicking through clips, frame by frame, trying to decide if his assistant manager was a thief or a victim of cruel circumstance. I wanted to believe the truth would be enough, that the images of me carefully counting change, balancing drawers, and locking the safe would clear my name. But a gnawing fear remained. What if it wasn't enough? What if my mother's word, sharp and insistent, carried more weight than hours of silent, grainy video? That fear became more real when she showed up again on Monday. I was shelving a new shipment of books when I heard her voice near the front counter, smooth and commanding as always. "Is Mr. Harrison in? I need to speak with him directly." I froze, my hand tightening around the stack of novels I held. My stomach dropped as Claire glanced at me from across the room, eyebrows raised. My mother swept inside with her polished coat, her hair perfectly styled, her posture rigid. She looked like a woman on a mission. "Janet," I said carefully, setting the books down, "what are you doing here?" She ignored me. "I need to see Mr. Harrison." I rushed to intercept her before she could barge into his office. "Mom, you can't just walk in here and—" She cut me off, lowering her voice but sharpening her tone. "I know what I saw in my daughter. She's been sneaky since she was a teenager. You think I don't know my own child? You're too blind to see what's right in front of you, Rebecca." The words stung, but before I could respond, Mr. Harrison emerged from his office, adjusting his tie. "Mrs. Collins, why don't you step inside so we can talk privately?" My mother cast me a smug look before following him in. The door closed, and I was left outside with a twisting gut. Claire walked over and whispered, "What is she doing? Doesn't she realize she's making things worse?" I shook my head, my throat too tight to answer. All I could do was wait. Minutes stretched like hours until finally the office door opened again. My mother walked out first, her chin tilted high, as though she had just delivered some crucial testimony. Mr. Harrison followed, his face neutral but tense. He gave me a short nod before retreating back into the office without a word. When she passed me, I grabbed her arm, my voice trembling with fury. "Why are you doing this? Why are you trying to ruin me?" She turned her cold eyes on me, her lips curving into a smile that didn't reach them. "Because you need to learn, Rebecca. You've been pretending you're grown, pretending you can handle life on your own. Maybe now you'll finally realize you're not as perfect as you think." I yanked my arm free, my hands shaking. "This isn't teaching me anything except that you want me to fail. That's not love. That's cruelty." She didn't answer, just walked away with the confidence of someone who thought she had won. That night, I couldn't shake the image of her face, the satisfaction in her eyes. But as much as her words cut, they also hardened something inside me. I realized I couldn't keep playing defense, waiting for her next attack. If I wanted to survive this, I needed to gather evidence of my own. Not just the camera footage, but a pattern of her behavior that proved this wasn't a one-time concern from a well-meaning mother. This was a history of sabotage. I started by writing down every instance I could remember. The false report in high school, the misplaced jewelry she accused me of stealing, the calls to relatives where she exaggerated my struggles, painting me as reckless or lazy. Each memory, once painful and scattered, now formed a trail of evidence that showed a clear pattern. Janet Collins had been undermining me for years under the guise of teaching lessons. But memories alone weren't enough. I needed something tangible. I called my old friend Emily, who had been with me during the jewelry incident years ago.
When I explained the situation, Emily's voice hardened. I remember that. She accused you of taking her bracelet, and then she found it in her drawer a week later. I'll never forget how humiliated you looked. If you need me to back you up, I will. Her words steadied me. It wasn't just me who remembered. Others had seen it too. At the cafe, Claire and a few other coworkers began quietly supporting me. We've watched you close out registers 100 times. You're meticulous. If anyone's saying otherwise, they're lying. A couple of others nodded in agreement. Their solidarity gave me strength even if their voices hadn't yet reached Mr. Harrison.
Meanwhile, Mr. Harrison continued combing through the footage. I caught glimpses of him late at night, his face lit by the glow of the monitor, his expression pensive. One evening, he called me in to show me a clip. On the screen, I was locking the safe, then turning off the lights before leaving. "This is consistent," he said quietly. "Every night, the routine is the same. Nothing looks suspicious." Relief bloomed in me, but he raised a hand. "That said, your mother insists you're clever enough to hide it, that if you did take something, it wouldn't be obvious. I'm not saying I believe her, but I have to be thorough." Her words again, echoing even in his voice. The opposition was growing stronger, weaving their narrative even as evidence mounted in my favor. Walking home that night, the city lights flickering above me, I realized the truth was slowly stacking up, but so was the pressure. Every piece of evidence I gathered, every ally who spoke for me, seemed to provoke my mother further. She wasn't going to back down. If anything, she was preparing her defense, sharpening her accusations, ready to strike again when I least expected it. Still, for the first time, I had more than fear on my side. I had allies, I had witnesses, and most importantly, I had cameras quietly building a case that not even my mother could twist. The question wasn't whether the truth would surface, it was whether I would be strong enough to withstand the storm that came before it did. By the time the next weekend rolled around, I felt like I had been living on a knife's edge for weeks. Every shift at the bookstore carried a weight of expectation. Was today the day Mr. Harrison would finally decide whether I was guilty or innocent? My coworkers tried to be supportive, but I could sense their unease whenever my mother's accusations came up. Doubt lingers like smoke in the air, invisible yet suffocating. Even though they said they trusted me, I could see the question flicker in their eyes. What if Janet Collins was right? What if Rebecca really had stolen money and was simply clever enough to hide it? That doubt cut deeper than anything else, but it also fueled my resolve. I had to prove the truth, not just for Mr. Harrison's sake, but for my own dignity. On Saturday morning, Mr. Harrison asked me into his office before opening hours. My pulse quickened as I walked in and saw the computer screen paused on a security clip. He gestured for me to sit down, his face unreadable. "Rebecca, I want you to see this." He pressed play. On the screen, I appeared, carrying the till from the register into the back room. The camera followed my movements as I counted the bills, stacked the coins, and filled out the deposit slip. Everything was precise by the book. But then the video caught something else. Someone else. The angle of the backroom camera revealed the door cracking open just as I left with the deposit bag. A figure slipped in, moving quickly, their hand reaching into the drawer I had just closed. The lighting was dim, but the outline of the person was unmistakable. It wasn't me. My heart pounded as the footage continued, showing the figure pocketing a small stack of bills before exiting as quietly as they had entered. When the clip ended, I looked at Mr. Harrison, my voice shaking. That's proof, isn't it? That's not me." He nodded slowly, leaning back in his chair. "It's not you. But the problem is, it's also not clear who it is. The face never shows directly. Still, this changes things. It shows that the money didn't disappear the way your mother suggested, and it raises questions about who had access." I felt a rush of relief and anger at once. Relief that the camera had caught the truth, anger that I had been dragged through humiliation when the evidence was there all along. "So, you believe me now?" I asked, my voice small. Mr. Harrison exhaled heavily. I believe you didn't steal, but I need to be careful about how we handle this. Your mother is persistent, and the last thing I want is a scandal that affects the business. We have to approach this delicately. The mention of my mother made my stomach twist. I could already imagine her response if she found out. She would dismiss the footage, twist it, claim it proves nothing. She would insist that somehow, some way, I had orchestrated it. Later that day, I confided in Claire, showing her a still image Mr. Harrison had let me save from the video. Her eyes widened. "That's huge, Rebecca. This proves you weren't lying. Why isn't he using this to shut your mom down immediately?" "Because," I said bitterly, "my mother doesn't give up. She'll find a way to argue it's staged or irrelevant. Harrison wants to avoid drama." Claire shook her head. "This is already drama. He needs to stand up for you."
Her frustration mirrored my own, but part of me understood Harrison's caution. My mother had a way of weaving her story into a convincing narrative, and if she found out about this video, she would pounce on any uncertainty. Still, undeniable proof was on my side now. For the first time, I had more than words and memories. I had evidence caught on camera. That night, as I walked home, I thought about the figure in the video. The quick movements, the way they seemed to know exactly where the cash was kept. This wasn't random theft. It was someone who understood the store's routines. A chill crept up my spine as I realized the theft had nothing to do with me at all. I had been framed, not by accident, but by design. The next morning, Mr. Harrison called a staff meeting. Everyone gathered in the back room, the atmosphere heavy with anticipation. He stood in front of us, arms crossed, and said, "There's been some tension lately regarding missing cash and accusations. I want to make it clear that Rebecca is not responsible." His voice was steady, but his eyes flicked to me as though urging me to brace for what was next. He turned on the monitor and played the clip. Gasps filled the room as my coworkers watched the shadowy figure take the money. Claire glanced at me, her face filled with vindication. Another coworker muttered, "So it wasn't her. I knew it." When the clip ended, Harrison continued, "We don't know who this person is yet, but the important thing is that Rebecca has been exonerated. Moving forward, we'll be implementing stricter procedures to prevent this from happening again." For a brief moment, I felt like I could breathe again. My name was cleared, my innocence confirmed in front of everyone. But then the door at the front of the shop opened, and a familiar voice echoed down the hall. My mother's voice. "Rebecca," she called, her tone sugary sweet. "Are you hiding back there?" The room went silent. My blood ran cold. She hadn't been invited. She had come on her own again, probably to press her case further. Mr. Harrison stiffened, clearly uncomfortable, before whispering, "Do not mention the video yet. Let me handle this." But my mother didn't wait for permission. She strode into the back room, her gaze sweeping over the staff. "I hope you're all being careful," she said, her smile brittle. "My daughter has a clever way of making herself look innocent." I clenched my fists, trembling with rage, but before I could speak, Claire snapped, "You should see the video before you say another word." The air thickened with tension. My mother's smile faltered slightly, but she recovered quickly, tilting her head with mock curiosity. "Oh, what's this?" she asked, her tone deceptively light, though the sharp edge in her eyes betrayed her. Her game was about to unravel. For the first time, she wasn't in control of the story. The truth was out, undeniable, caught on camera. And though I knew she would fight back harder than ever, I also knew this was the turning point. I wasn't the one under the microscope anymore. She was. The moment my mother's gaze fell on the paused video screen, the air in the back room felt electric with tension. Her carefully composed composure wavered just slightly, but only for a fraction of a second, enough for everyone else to notice, including me.
She quickly masked it with her usual practiced smile, tilting her head as if she were merely curious about the footage. "Oh, what's this?" she asked, her tone deceptively light, though the sharp edge in her eyes betrayed her. Claire, standing nearby, took a step forward, pointing at the screen. "This is the security footage from the register. Watch closely," she said firmly. The other staff murmured among themselves, a mixture of shock and relief in their voices, as the shadowy figure who had been accused of being me appeared on screen, taking money from the drawer with precise, deliberate movements. My mother's lips thinned, her hands gripping the edges of a chair as if trying to anchor herself. "Rebecca, this doesn't prove anything. Maybe it's staged. Maybe someone wanted to frame me," she said sharply, turning her gaze toward me with venom. The room fell silent. Every pair of eyes was now on us. I could feel the weight of all those stares, the judgment, the anticipation. My mother had always been the type to intimidate by sheer force of personality, but now the tables had turned. Something inside me snapped. For years, I had tiptoed around her, trying not to offend, trying not to provoke, trying to survive emotionally under her constant criticism. But now, with undeniable proof in front of everyone, I realized that my silence was no longer an option. If I stayed quiet, her narrative would dominate the story. I would continue to be painted as the guilty one, while the real truth, plain and simple, would be ignored. I took a deep breath, feeling my pulse spike, and stepped forward. "Mom," I said, my voice steady, louder than I expected it to be. "You've lied about me for the last time. This footage shows exactly what happened. I didn't take anything. The thief you claimed I was. Look at the screen. That isn't me."
The room shifted, a low hum of astonishment rising from the other employees. My mother's face registered shock, but quickly she masked it with disbelief. "You're twisting this," she said, her voice tight. "You've always been manipulative, Rebecca. Maybe this is just another one of your schemes to make yourself look innocent." I shook my head, trying to keep my hands from trembling. "No, Mom, this isn't manipulation. This is the truth. I've spent years proving myself to you and to Mr. Harrison, and now the cameras prove what I've been saying all along. You've been wrong about me. Not once, but countless times, and I'm done letting you control how people see me." For a moment, the room was frozen, the tension so thick you could have cut it with a knife. My mother's lips pressed together tightly, the smile slipping from her face. Harrison stepped forward, his presence firm and authoritative. "Janet, we have to be clear. Rebecca's been nothing but honest, and this footage confirms her account. I can't let false accusations threaten the integrity of this workplace." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and calculating. But the sight of the footage, the confirmation from someone in authority, seemed to shake her. I could see her mind working, trying to craft a new lie. But every angle she considered was thwarted by the raw, unalterable truth on that screen. My voice, now surer, rang out. "Everyone here can see it, Mom. I didn't steal anything. You've spent years trying to control me, to belittle me, to humiliate me for your own sense of satisfaction. But this proves that your lessons were never about teaching me anything. They were about control." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment, I thought she might storm out. But she stayed, her eyes narrowing as she tried to recover her composure. "Rebecca," she said slowly, each word deliberate, Maybe I just wanted you to understand consequences. I only wanted you to learn." I laughed softly, not cruelly, but with a sharp edge that I hadn't allowed myself to use before. "Mom, teaching me lessons doesn't mean destroying my reputation. It doesn't mean lying to my boss and putting my livelihood at risk. That isn't teaching. That's manipulation. And it ends here." The staff looked at me with awe, a few nodding slightly, their expressions confirming what I already knew. The truth was finally shifting the power. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, nodding in support. "Rebecca, I believe you, and going forward, any further concerns about this matter will be addressed with evidence, not accusation." Her eyes flicked to him, sharp and calculating, but the sight of the footage, the confirmation from someone in authority, seemed to shake her.
I could see her mind working, trying to craft a new lie, but every angle she considered was thwarted by the raw, unalterable truth on that screen. My voice, now surer, rang out. "Everyone here can see it, Mom. I didn't steal anything. You've spent years trying to control me, to belittle me, to humiliate me for your own sense of satisfaction. But this proves that your lessons were never about teaching me anything. They were about control." Her jaw tightened, and for a moment I thought she might storm out, but she stayed, her eyes narrowing as she tried to recover her composure. "Rebecca," she said slowly, each word deliberate, Maybe I just wanted you to understand consequences. I only wanted you to learn." I laughed softly, not cruelly, but with a sharp edge that I hadn't allowed myself to use before. "Mom, teaching me lessons doesn't mean destroying my reputation. It doesn't mean lying to my boss and putting my livelihood at risk. That isn't teaching. That's manipulation. And it ends here." The staff looked at me with awe, a few nodding slightly, their expressions confirming what I already knew. The truth was finally shifting the power. Mr. Harrison cleared his throat, nodding in support. "Rebecca, I believe you, and going forward, any further concerns about this matter will be addressed with evidence, not accusation." Her lips pressed into a thin line, and finally, after a long pause, she turned and left the store. The door closed behind her, and for the first time in years, I felt the relief of not just being vindicated, but of reclaiming my voice. The weight of decades of her manipulations had been lifted, if only slightly, and I knew I couldn't let her shadow control me anymore. I sank into a chair, my hands still shaking slightly, but my mind clearer than it had been in years. I had chosen to speak, to stand up for myself in the face of betrayal, and in doing so, I had begun to tip the scales toward justice. It wasn't the end of the story. My mother would likely try to fight back, but I had crossed the point of no return. I wasn't hiding anymore. I wasn't afraid. The truth had been spoken, and the first real victory was mine. Even as I looked around the room, seeing the support in the faces of my coworkers, I knew the battle wasn't over. But for the first time, I felt empowered. My choice to confront her publicly, to refuse to be silenced, had set in motion a chain of events that could no longer be undone. I was no longer the child under her thumb. I was a woman reclaiming her life. The week following the public revelation of the footage was tense in a way I hadn't anticipated. My mother didn't leave things quietly. If anything, her determination intensified. Every time I entered the bookstore, I braced myself for her next move. I knew that her departure after the staff meeting wasn't an admission of defeat. It was a strategic retreat, the quiet before a storm she intended to unleash. I found myself constantly scanning the parking lot, half expecting her to appear at the doorway with another rehearsed story, ready to sow doubt. Sure enough, by Wednesday, she had made her presence known again. I was stocking shelves when Claire rushed in, her face pale. "Rebecca, she's here. She asked for you, and she looks serious." My stomach sank. I straightened my back and tried to steel myself. When I walked towards the front counter, my mother was already there, her arms crossed, and her gaze fixed on me like a predator locking on to prey. She didn't greet me, she simply tilted her head, as though assessing me, testing me, seeing if I had the courage to meet her eyes. "You see, I've been busy," she said, smooth but cold. "Busy convincing everyone you're innocent. How convenient." I clenched my fists, but forced my voice to remain calm. "Mom, I don't need to convince anyone. The footage speaks for itself."
Her laugh was low and dismissive. "Footage doesn't tell the whole story, Rebecca. You've always been clever, haven't you? Hiding things in plain sight. Maybe that's why I had to teach you a lesson. Maybe I was right to warn Mr. Harrison." I felt my jaw tighten. Teaching me a lesson doesn't mean putting my career in jeopardy. You're crossing a line. Again. Her eyes narrowed. Am I? Or am I just showing you the reality of consequences? Maybe you think everyone has to like you, believe you, follow your version of events. Life doesn't work that way. I took a deep breath, letting her words wash over me without sinking in. I had rehearsed this moment countless times in my head. I wasn't going to let her intimidate me anymore. "Mom," I said firmly, "the reality is your accusations were false.
You've made it very clear over the years that your approval is conditional. But I'm done letting your version of reality define me. I'm standing on my own, and I'm telling you, your lies stop here." Her lips curled into a tight, almost predatory smile. Bold words for someone who owes everything to me. You think you can walk away from me, from my guidance, from everything I've done for you, and just declare victory? You're naive. "I'm not naive," I said firmly, my voice rising slightly with conviction. "I'm done hiding. I'm done being afraid. Every lie you've told, every manipulation, every false lesson, it ends now. I won't let you control my life anymore." She stepped closer, her presence oppressive. I could feel the weight of her authority trying to crush me, the same weight I had felt as a child whenever she scolded me for trivial mistakes. Control isn't the word, Rebecca. Responsibility is. And you've been reckless, thinking your innocence can speak for itself. Some things need to be shown. I shook my head. No, some things need to be truthful, and this time the truth is on my side. Her eyes flicked toward the security camera near the ceiling, as if noticing it for the first time. A brief flash of uncertainty crossed her face before she smoothed it over, replacing it with the mask of confidence she had perfected over decades. "You're lucky this time. The evidence may protect you for now, but life isn't always this forgiving. Watch your back, Rebecca. Sometimes lessons aren't over just because you think they are." Her words were a warning, not a threat. It was her way of planting fear, the way she always had. But this time, I wasn't afraid. I had allies now, evidence, and a support system I hadn't had as a teenager. The tide had shifted, even if she refused to acknowledge it. After she left, the staff exhaled collectively, and Claire came over, placing a hand on my shoulder. "She's going to keep pushing," she said gently. "You need to be ready." I nodded. "I know, and I will be." That night, I sat in my apartment, replaying the encounter over and over in my mind. The confrontation had confirmed what I already suspected. My mother wouldn't back down quietly. She was relentless, a force I couldn't reason with. But it also confirmed another truth. I had reached a turning point. I had spoken up publicly, faced her intimidation, and refused to cower. That choice had shifted the balance of power. As I reviewed the security footage again, this time alone, I noticed details I hadn't before. The precision of the shadowy figure, the way the camera angles captured every movement. The proof was undeniable, and it was only a matter of time before all the facts aligned against her lies. The anticipation of that moment both thrilled and terrified me. By the end of the week, the tension had escalated, and it was clear my mother's attacks would continue, but so would mine. I was no longer the passive target of her manipulations. I had taken the first step towards reclaiming control of my life. And while the confrontation was exhausting, emotionally draining, and fraught with tension, it had also reinforced something I hadn't realized before. Fear only had power as long as I let it. From that point on, every interaction with her became a test of Resolute. Every text, phone call, or appearance was met with careful composure, because I knew the moment I faltered, she would seize it. But with the evidence I had, the witnesses who believed me, and the courage I had summoned, I felt a confidence I hadn't felt in years. The confrontation was a warning, yes, but it was also proof that I was no longer defenseless. The battle wasn't over, but for the first time, I could see a path forward. My mother had escalated, but so had I. The war of truth versus manipulation had entered a new stage, and I was prepared to see it through to the end, no matter how long it took.
By the time Friday rolled around, the emotional exhaustion had hit me like a freight train. The confrontation with my mother earlier in the week had left me drained, and now the fallout from that encounter was rippling through my life in ways I hadn't anticipated. At work, the atmosphere had changed. My coworkers, while supportive, were quieter, more cautious. glancing at me with curiosity and subtle concern rather than outright camaraderie. Every whispered conversation, every glance toward the back office made me hyper-aware that my private life and family drama had become a spectacle. Even though Mr. Harrison had confirmed my innocence, the tension lingered. Outside the store, the shadow of my mother's influence loomed larger than ever. She had begun sending messages to mutual acquaintances, subtly twisting the narrative to make it seem like I was overreacting, that I had lied about her accusations, that I was being ungrateful and dramatic. Friends I thought I could rely on started questioning my version of events. Even some extended family members, whom I had never suspected of doubting me, began offering cautious words. Maybe you're misunderstanding her intentions. Maybe she meant well. The doubt in their eyes cut deeper than any false accusation, and for the first time, I felt truly isolated. At home, I paced the small apartment, unable to focus on anything. My mind raced with every possible scenario. What if my mother escalated further? What if she found some way to manipulate Mr. Harrison, the staff, or anyone else in my life? I had spoken the truth, but now I had to live with the consequences of making her angry, of daring to challenge her authority. The fear gnawed at me, twisting my stomach into knots, and sleep became a stranger. Nights were spent staring at the ceiling, replaying the confrontation, analyzing every word, every gesture, wondering if I had been too forceful, too emotional, too obvious. Then came the phone call that nearly broke me. It was my mother. Her voice, deceptively soft, carried a subtle edge that sent shivers down my spine. "Rebecca," she began, "I hope you understand what you've done, making me look foolish, undermining me in front of everyone. You've crossed a line. Don't think this is over." I felt my pulse spike, my fingers trembling as I gripped the phone. "Mom, why are you doing this? I didn't lie. I didn't steal. Why can't you leave me alone?" I pleaded. There was silence on the other end for a moment, then a cold laugh. "Leave you alone? You think this is about leaving you alone? No, Rebecca. This is about teaching you your place. You may have won a small battle, but the war isn't finished. I know how to push you, how to make you squirm, and I will." The words echoed in my mind long after she hung up. I felt cornered, trapped between the relief of proving my innocence and the dread of the battles yet to come. The isolation became suffocating. I couldn't confide in anyone without fearing their judgment or doubt. Every message from a friend carried hidden questions. Every passing interaction seemed loaded with suspicion. My workplace, which had once felt like a safe haven, now seemed like a stage where everyone was silently evaluating me, waiting for the next misstep. I realized, painfully, that proving the truth wasn't the end. Speaking up had set the stage for retaliation, for scrutiny, for relentless pressure. Even the evidence I had, the footage, wasn't enough to shield me from the psychological warfare my mother was waging. And worse, I began to question myself, wondering if perhaps my anger had been excessive, if my assertiveness had been perceived as aggression. The clarity I had felt after showing the video seemed clouded by doubt. That night, I sat at my kitchen table staring at the stack of printed footage stills and my notes documenting years of manipulation. The paper in front of me felt both like armor and chains. Armor because it represented the truth, chains because it reminded me of the burden I carried, the weight of having to defend myself continuously against someone who had long been an expert at gaslighting. I wanted to cry, to scream, to release the tension building inside me, but I felt paralyzed by the knowledge that any outward display of emotion could be used against me. In the days that followed, small incidents added to the pressure. Anonymous messages appeared in the store's suggestion box, thinly veiled criticisms of me. A vendor called to ask if there had been any issues with my management. Even the staff seemed quieter, unsure of how to navigate the storm my mother had stirred. It was as if the entire world had become a minefield, and every step I took carried the risk of setting off a new wave of conflict. Yet, in the darkest moments,
A small spark of resolve persisted. I reminded myself of the evidence, the undeniable truth captured on camera. I reminded myself of the coworkers who had witnessed my integrity and who supported me despite the tension. I reminded myself that my voice, finally raised, had broken a cycle that had lasted for years. The isolation and backlash were brutal, but they were also signs that the truth had power. The louder the resistance, the more it confirmed that I had struck at the core of my mother's manipulative control.
Still, the emotional toll was staggering. I cried alone in my apartment more than once, feeling the weight of anger, betrayal, and exhaustion pressing on me. I realized that victory wasn't immediate. It wasn't simple. Speaking the truth had made me a target in ways I hadn't anticipated, and for the first time, I understood the full cost of standing up to someone who had long dominated my life. The consequences were real, immediate, and painful. But amid the despair, I sensed a faint glimmer of hope, a recognition that the struggle was necessary, that the darkness I was enduring was the precursor to a breakthrough I could not yet see. By the end of that week, though battered and drained, I made a silent promise to myself. I would endure, no matter what tactics my mother employed. I would gather strength, protect my truth, and weather the storm. The darkness of the soul was heavy, but it was not the end. It was a crucible, shaping me into someone capable of facing the final confrontations ahead, someone who would not be silenced or broken. And with that fragile but steadfast resolve, I began to see the first outlines of the path toward justice and vindication. The tension in the bookstore that Monday morning was palpable, thick enough to be cut with a knife. Even the air conditioning seemed to hum with nervous energy, as if it were aware that today was not just another shift. It was the day everything would be laid bare. I arrived early, my steps careful and deliberate, my heart hammering in my chest. Mr. Harrison had requested a formal meeting in the back office, and this time it wasn't just a private conversation. He insisted that everyone involved, the staff who had witnessed me, the co-workers who had offered my support, and my mother herself be present. It was time for the truth to be confronted head-on. As I entered the office, I saw my mother already there, sitting stiffly with her arms crossed, her jaw tight. Her expression was an odd mixture of arrogance and simmering rage. Across from her, the staff had gathered, their faces a mix of anticipation, concern, and support. Mr. Harrison stood at the head of the table, his posture formal, commanding respect from everyone in the room. "We're here to address a very serious matter. There have been accusations concerning missing money, and it's time to examine the facts." My mother's eyes flicked to me, a sharp edge of challenge in her gaze. "I maintain my position," she said, her tone carefully controlled. "Rebecca has been reckless, and I warned you all that she could not be trusted." "Mom, the truth is simple. I did not steal. I've never stolen. The footage, the testimony from everyone here, and my actions over the past months prove it. I've worked diligently, honestly, and responsibly. The accusations against me were false." Mr. Harrison gestured toward the monitor behind him. "Let's review the evidence." He played the security footage, the familiar sequence of me counting the till, locking the safe, and leaving the back room, followed by the shadowy figure entering and taking the money. The room fell silent. Even my mother's carefully cultivated composure wavered as the undeniable proof played out before everyone's eyes. "Look closely," Mr. Harrison continued. "This is the reality of what happened. There is no room for interpretation. Rebecca did not take this money. The footage clearly shows someone else was responsible." A low murmur spread through the room. Claire's eyes glistened with relief, and a few of the other staff nodded in quiet affirmation. I felt a surge of validation. The weight that had pressed down on me for weeks, months even, began to lift. For the first time in a long time, I felt seen, heard, and believed. My mother's face flushed,
and she leaned forward, her voice sharp. "This doesn't change my opinion. You could have staged this. You could have manipulated the timing. You think you're clever enough to make yourself look innocent. But I know you, Rebecca. You've always been clever, sneaky, and manipulative." I stood taller, refusing to shrink from her accusations. "Mom, this isn't about being clever. It's about honesty, integrity, and evidence. You've spent years trying to control me and shape a narrative that isn't true, but the facts speak for themselves. This footage, the witnesses, the documentation, it's all real. Your accusations are false, and everyone here can see it."
Finally, she spoke, her voice tight, almost a whisper. I still think you've exaggerated. You're making it seem worse than it is." I shook my head firmly. "No, Mom. The reality is worse for you. Your actions have been exposed. The truth cannot be rewritten. Today, it's undeniable. I did not steal. I am not deceitful. And I will not allow you to define me or my reputation any longer." Mr. Harrison turned to the staff. "It's important that we acknowledge the courage it took for Rebecca to speak up, for the staff to support her, and for the facts to be examined honestly. This is a learning moment for all of us about integrity, accountability, and fairness." The room was quiet for a moment. Then Claire stepped forward, voice firm but warm. "Rebecca, we all saw what happened. We know you. We believe you. You've been honest, responsible, and brave through all of this. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise." A ripple of agreement moved through the room. My mother's lips pressed into a thin line. She looked around, realizing that her control over the narrative had finally evaporated. She was surrounded by witnesses, evidence, and authority, all aligned against her version of events. I felt a strange calm wash over me. The months of fear, anxiety, and tension had led to this moment. I had spoken the truth, and the truth had stood up to scrutiny. My mother could rail against it, manipulate it, or deny it all she wanted, but the facts were immutable. I was free, validated, and no longer defined by someone else's lies. Mr. Harrison concluded the meeting. Moving forward, Rebecca's actions and integrity will not be questioned. Measures will be implemented to prevent future misunderstandings, and this matter will be considered resolved. As the staff filed out, murmuring words of support and relief, I finally allowed myself to exhale fully. My mother lingered a moment longer, her expression unreadable, then left the office without a word. It was a small victory, but it was monumental in its significance. The truth had been presented, examined, and validated, and I had survived the trial of my life with my dignity intact. I sat back, exhausted but resolute, knowing that this was more than just clearing my name. It was reclaiming my voice, my autonomy, and my power. And though the emotional journey wasn't over, this confrontation had proven that truth, when pursued relentlessly and courageously, could not be denied. In the days that followed the confrontation, the atmosphere at the bookstore slowly shifted from tense anticipation to a calm, cautious optimism. It was almost as if the air itself had been cleared after a storm. The constant worry, the whispered doubts, the uncertainty that had clung to every interaction had finally lifted. The staff returned to their routines, yet there was a noticeable difference. A collective awareness that the truth had been upheld, that fairness and integrity had been recognized, and that I, Rebecca, had finally been vindicated. Mr. Harrison's earlier words had carried real weight. He had made it abundantly clear that my actions, my honesty, and my professionalism were beyond reproach, and that reassurance reverberated through the team, restoring a sense of equilibrium that had been absent for weeks. Even so, the shadow of my mother's manipulations lingered in subtle ways. She had not attempted another in-person confrontation, but the whispers, the selective stories circulating through mutual acquaintances, and her attempts to paint herself as a misunderstood parent continued to reach me indirectly. I learned to navigate it with caution, treating every message and interaction with measured calm rather than fear.
The truth had been validated publicly, but I realized that real justice often required more than a single confrontation. It demanded patience, resilience, and the ability to continue asserting one's integrity even when others tried to distort reality. At work, Claire became an even stronger ally, quietly supporting me while fostering a sense of confidence among the staff. "Rebecca," she said one morning, placing a hand on my shoulder, "look at how everyone's reactions have changed. People are treating you differently now. They respect you and they know the truth. You didn't just defend yourself, you showed everyone what courage looks like." Her words resonated deeply. For so long, I had felt trapped under the weight of my mother's accusations, doubted by the people I trusted. Now there was tangible acknowledgement that I had endured the trial with dignity, that my voice had been heard, and that it mattered. Mr. Harrison also took steps to formalize the resolution, ensuring that the bookstore had clear protocols to prevent similar accusations or miscommunications in the future. He implemented stricter procedures for cash handling, including double-checking deposits and additional security measures. While these changes were partly practical, they also symbolized a larger recognition that the institution itself, not just the individuals involved, was committed to fairness, accountability, and justice. These measures not only protected me from future accusations, but also reinforced a culture of integrity that extended to everyone on staff.
Outside the bookstore, the ripple effects of the confrontation became evident as well. Friends and extended family members who had wavered in my support gradually aligned with the truth. Those who had initially questioned me began to offer quiet apologies, acknowledging that they had been influenced by my mother's narrative. Their recognition, while sometimes hesitant, was nonetheless validating, reaffirming that the truth had an enduring power that could withstand manipulation and deceit. I felt a profound sense of relief, realizing that my perseverance had not only restored my reputation, but had also helped correct misunderstandings in my broader social circle. Despite the validation and acknowledgement, the experience had left an indelible mark on me. I realized that enduring false accusations, confronting manipulative behavior, and asserting my truth required more than courage. It demanded emotional resilience and strategic thinking. The months of stress, anxiety, and constant vigilance had tested me in ways I could not have anticipated. And while the resolution brought closure in many respects, it also left me with a newfound awareness of my own strength and capacity for endurance. I had faced an adversary who had long held power over me, and I had emerged not only unbroken, but empowered with the knowledge that my voice mattered. As the days turned into weeks, I noticed subtle shifts in my confidence. I engaged more openly with coworkers, participated actively in meetings, and began to envision a future in which my professional abilities, rather than my mother's manipulations, defined me. The sense of liberation was profound. The validation of truth had created space for personal growth and the pursuit of my own aspirations without the constant fear of misrepresentation. Each day reinforced the understanding that justice, once acknowledged and supported by concrete evidence, had a stabilizing effect on both my environment and my sense of self. Finally, I took deliberate steps to reclaim personal peace beyond the bookstore. I sought therapy to process the years of tension and manipulation, working through feelings of anger, frustration, and betrayal. The sessions allowed me to articulate my experiences, understand the dynamics of my mother's behavior, and develop strategies for maintaining boundaries and protecting my autonomy moving forward. By confronting the emotional aftermath with intentionality, I transformed the trial I had endured into a catalyst for personal growth and resilience. By the end of this period, life began to feel balanced again. The staff treated me with respect and trust, my relationship with friends and family stabilized, and I had established a sense of security that had previously been unattainable. I could finally appreciate the significance of what had occurred. The truth had prevailed,
My integrity had been confirmed, and the manipulations that once held sway over my life had been decisively challenged. This was not merely vindication, it was the restoration of my autonomy, the affirmation of my courage, and the establishment of a new equilibrium in which honesty and accountability held sway. In that calm, reflective space, I realized that justice was not just a matter of proving innocence, but of reclaiming one's voice and dignity. I had endured false accusations, confronted a manipulative force, and survived the trial with integrity intact. And in doing so, I had laid the foundation for a life defined not by the shadows of others' control, but by the strength, resilience, and courage I had cultivated through the experience. Months had passed since the confrontation, since the undeniable proof had cleared my name, and since the staff, Mr. Harrison, and even my wider social circle had acknowledged the truth. Yet the sense of victory was no longer just about being vindicated. It had transformed into a profound understanding of my own resilience and autonomy. I no longer measured my worth by my mother's approval or the ever-shifting opinions of others. I measured it by my integrity, my courage, and the ability to stand firmly in the face of falsehood. I woke up each morning with a sense of clarity and purpose I never knew as a teenager, never knew as a young adult under her shadow. Each day became an affirmation that I was not defined by past accusations, but by the strength I had found within myself. The bookstore, once a place of anxiety and scrutiny, now felt like a sanctuary. The staff operated smoothly, the cash handling procedures were secure, and Mr. Harrison's management exuded fairness and confidence. I was no longer the target of whispered doubts or speculations. Instead, I was treated with respect, my decisions valued, my integrity trusted. There was a rhythm to the days, a sense of stability and order that had been absent for so long, and I reveled in it. Yet the true transformation was not only external, it was deeply internal. I had discovered a voice that would not be silenced, a courage that could not be intimidated, and a sense of self that could withstand manipulation and deceit.
Beyond the bookstore, I began to take intentional steps toward my personal growth. I started volunteering at a local youth program, helping teenagers navigate challenges similar to what I had endured. I shared my story selectively, focusing on the lessons of resilience, the importance of evidence and truth, and the value of speaking up even when it feels impossible. The young people I worked with responded with curiosity and admiration, often asking questions about how to deal with bullies, manipulative authority figures, or family members who tried to control their lives. It was humbling and empowering to see how my experience could help others recognize their own strength and assert their own autonomy. My relationship with my mother, though never fully healed, had shifted as well. She continued to hold her opinions, and there were still moments of tension when we crossed paths, but I no longer felt the suffocating pressure to conform to her narrative. Boundaries, once an abstract concept, became a practical and necessary tool. I learned to interact with her on my own terms, recognizing when to engage, when to assert myself, and when to step away to preserve my peace. That clarity brought a sense of freedom I had never imagined possible. The liberation was quiet but profound. I had reclaimed my life, and nothing she said or did could erase the truth I now carried in every fiber of my being. At work, my confidence translated into leadership. I began taking on more responsibility, mentoring new employees, and contributing to the bookstore's community initiatives. I realized that my experience had given me insights not just into resilience, but into the importance of fairness, accountability, and communication. I became a model for others, not through authority, but through example, showing how honesty, courage, and integrity could navigate complex interpersonal challenges. My story became a quiet legend within the team, the young woman falsely accused who refused to be silenced, and who emerged stronger, wiser, and more self-assured than ever.
Socially, too, I found new connections that reinforced the life I wanted to lead. Friends who had doubted me slowly recognized the truth of my character, apologizing for their uncertainty and embracing me with genuine respect. New friendships formed, grounded in honesty, mutual support, and shared values. I discovered that living authentically, without fear of manipulation, attracted people who aligned with my energy and goals. My world expanded not because I had changed others, but because I had changed myself. And in doing so, the quality of my relationships improved dramatically. Reflecting on the months of conflict, confrontation, and resolution, I realized that the ordeal had been transformative in ways I hadn't anticipated. I had entered the storm fearful, uncertain, and reliant on external validation. I emerged grounded, self-aware, and empowered. The camera footage, once the central piece of evidence that proved my innocence, had become symbolic. It wasn't just proof against false accusations, it was proof that truth, perseverance, and courage could illuminate even the darkest shadows. Every time I thought of it, I was reminded that truth has weight, that integrity carries power, and that standing firm in the face of adversity can reshape a life. By the time summer arrived, I was fully immersed in this new chapter of life. I spent mornings at the bookstore, afternoons mentoring at the youth center, and evenings writing reflections on resilience and self-advocacy. I had learned that life doesn't hand victories to anyone. We earn them through persistence, integrity, and the courage to face those who seek to manipulate or control. I had earned my victory, not only over the false accusations, but over the fear and self-doubt that had once defined me. One quiet evening, as the sun dipped behind the city skyline and cast warm light across the bookstore's front windows, I realized something profound. I was no longer living under the weight of others' expectations. I was living as myself, confident, self-possessed, and purpose-driven. The experiences that had once been painful had been transformed into wisdom, and the challenges that had once threatened to break me had become the foundation of my strength. I had learned to trust my instincts, value evidence, and assert my voice. Most importantly, I had discovered that truth, courage, and integrity could carry me through even the most harrowing trials, and that in standing firm, I could not only reclaim my life, but help others reclaim theirs. In that moment, I smiled quietly to myself. The journey from accusation to vindication, from fear to empowerment, had been long and arduous, but the transformation was complete. I had emerged not only innocent, but strong, confident, and ready to embrace a life defined by purpose, truth, and resilience. The past no longer dictated my present. It had shaped the woman I had become. And in that realization, I found peace, empowerment, and the courage to move forward fully and unapologetically into the life I was meant to live. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.